The fat orphan girl begged her foster family not to throw her out into the street that night, but instead of helping her, they laughed in her face, dumped her clothes outside the house, and told her nobody would ever love a woman like her. 6 months later, the same girl would step out of a billionaire's luxury car wearing a designer dress with cameras flashing around her, while the people who once humiliated her stood frozen in disbelief. But on that cold, rainy night, Naomi Carter was still just a broken 23-year-old woman carrying 2 trash bags and a ruined sketchbook with nowhere left to go. "Please, just let me stay tonight." Naomi's voice shook as she stood at the front door, tears filling her eyes. Her foster aunt, Evelyn Brooks, crossed her arms and stared at her with complete disgust. "I'm tired of feeding you," Evelyn snapped. "You eat, sleep, cry, work your little diner job, and still act like this house owes you something." Naomi swallowed painfully. "I said, I'll pay you back next week after my paycheck comes." "Oh, please," Jasmine interrupted with a loud laugh from the couch. "You can barely afford shampoo. What exactly are you paying back?" Naomi lowered her eyes immediately. She was used to Jasmine's insults by now, but tonight every word felt sharper. Maybe because deep down, she knew this time they really meant it. Evelyn suddenly walked toward the hallway closet, grabbed Naomi's old backpack and tossed it toward the door. "You're leaving tonight." Naomi froze. "Aunt Evelyn, I'm not your aunt," the woman replied coldly. "I took you in because I felt sorry for you after your parents died. Biggest mistake of my life." The words hit Naomi harder than a slap. Her chest tightened so badly she could barely breathe. Ever since she was 8 years old, Naomi had lived from house to house, always feeling unwanted. After losing both parents in a car accident, she quickly learned that pity never lasted forever. People only tolerated sadness for a little while before they became annoyed by it. And Naomi had spent her whole life being too much for people, too emotional, too quiet, too awkward, too fat. At school, classmates laughed whenever she walked into the cafeteria carrying food. Boys dared each other to flirt with her as a joke. Girls mocked her cheap clothes and natural hair. By the time she turned 16, Naomi stopped trying to fit in anywhere. Drawing became her only escape. Every night after work, she filled old notebooks with fashion sketches nobody had ever seen. Beautiful dresses for women shaped like her. Elegant clothes for women society ignored. In her drawings, plus-size women were soft, powerful, glamorous, unforgettable. But in real life, Naomi barely felt visible at all. Evelyn opened the front door violently. "Get out!" Rain poured heavily outside. Naomi stared at the woman in disbelief. "You can't seriously want me sleeping outside. You should have thought about that before becoming a burden." "I didn't steal the money," Naomi whispered desperately. Jasmine rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh my God, here we go again." Earlier that evening, Jasmine claimed cash disappeared from her purse. Naomi denied taking anything, but nobody listened. They never listened, because blaming Naomi was easy. Naomi looked at Evelyn one last time, hoping to see even a little softness in her face. There was none. Only irritation, embarrassment, disgust. Slowly, Naomi bent down and picked up her trash bags. As she stepped outside, Evelyn delivered one final blow. Nobody wants a fat orphan. Naomi, remember that when the world slams the door in your face too. The door shut hard behind her. Naomi stood there silently for several seconds while rain soaked through her oversized gray hoodie. Her breathing became uneven as she tried not to cry. Inside the house, Jasmine started laughing again. Naomi finally turned and walked away. The streets were cold and nearly empty. Cars passed quickly through the rain while neon lights reflected across the wet pavement. Naomi held her bags tightly and kept her head down, trying not to think about how completely alone she was. She checked her pocket. $23. That was all she had left in the world. After almost an hour of walking, her legs began aching badly. She had worked a double shift at the diner earlier that day, and exhaustion weighed heavily on her body. Eventually, she reached a small bus stop downtown and sat on the wet bench, hugging herself tightly against the cold. Her stomach growled painfully. She ignored it. Naomi looked down at the sketchbook pressed against her chest. The edges were bent from years of use, but it was still the most valuable thing she owned. Carefully, she opened it. Inside were hundreds of drawings, dresses, runway concepts, fabric ideas, dreams. A tiny, sad smile appeared on her lips as she touched one of the pages. Then suddenly, headlights illuminated the street in front of her. Naomi looked up. A sleek black luxury car slowly stopped near the curb. Her body tensed immediately. The tinted back window rolled down halfway, revealing a man sitting inside, dark skin, sharp jawline, expensive black coat, eyes calm and unreadable. He looked rich enough to belong in another world entirely. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the man's gaze shifted toward the soaked sketchbook in Naomi's arms before returning to her face again. "You've been sitting in the rain for almost 20 minutes," he said calmly. Naomi tightened her grip on her bags. "I'm fine." The stranger studied her quietly. "No," he replied softly. "You're really not." The back door unlocked with a quiet click. Naomi's heartbeat quickened instantly. Then the man looked directly into her eyes and said the words that would completely change her life. "Get in before you freeze to death." Naomi's fingers tightened around the straps of her trash bags as she stared at the open car door. Rain continued falling heavily around her, soaking her hoodie and dripping from the curls pressed against her cheeks. Every instinct inside her told her not to trust strangers, especially rich men in expensive cars stopping for lonely women in the middle of the night. Too many girls disappeared that way. Too many stories ended badly that way. "I'm okay," she said quietly, even though her lips were already trembling from the cold. The man inside the car studied her for another moment before leaning back slightly in his seat. He didn't look annoyed by her hesitation. If anything, he looked patient. "You're freezing," he said calmly, "and you've been crying." Naomi immediately looked away, embarrassed. "I said I'm fine." The stranger glanced toward the driver in the front seat before speaking again. "You don't have to trust me, but at least let me take you somewhere warm." Naomi hesitated. She hated needing help. People always made help feel expensive later. Still, the cold was becoming unbearable. Her sneakers were soaked through, her hands felt numb, and exhaustion pulled heavily at her entire body. Slowly, she looked back toward the man again. He looked around, 35, maybe older, dark skin, sharp features, calm eyes that somehow seemed both cold and tired at the same time. His black coat probably cost more than Naomi earned in months, but there was something strange about the way he looked at her. Not pity, not disgust, not amusement. He looked at her like she was simply human. And Naomi honestly couldn't remember the last time someone had done that. Finally, after several long seconds, she stepped cautiously into the car. The warmth hit her instantly. Naomi almost sighed out loud as the heated air wrapped around her freezing body. The inside of the vehicle smelled faintly like leather and expensive cologne. Soft jazz played quietly through hidden speakers, while city lights blurred across the rain-covered windows. The driver closed the door behind her. Naomi sat stiffly near the edge of the seat, clutching her soaked sketchbook tightly against her chest. The man beside her noticed immediately. "You can put your things down," he said. "I'm okay." He gave a small nod like he expected that answer. For a few seconds, silence filled the car again as it slowly pulled away from the curb. Then the man finally spoke. "What's your name?" Naomi hesitated before answering quietly. "Naomi, I'm Damien." The name sounded familiar somehow, but Naomi was too exhausted to think clearly. Damien loosened his tie slightly and glanced toward her soaked sleeves. "You should have gotten out of the rain sooner." Naomi gave a bitter little laugh before she could stop herself. Didn't really have many options tonight. Damien noticed the sadness hidden inside her voice, but he didn't push further. Instead, he simply asked, "Have you eaten?" Naomi instantly lied. Yes. Her stomach betrayed her immediately with a loud growl. Heat rushed to her face in embarrassment, for the first time since stopping beside her. Damien smiled slightly. It wasn't a mocking smile, just human. "I'll take that as a no." Naomi lowered her eyes again. 20 minutes later, the car stopped outside a quiet, upscale restaurant near downtown. Naomi froze the moment she saw it. The place looked far too expensive. "I can't go in there," she whispered. Damien unfastened his watch calmly. "Why not?" Naomi looked down at herself. Oversized wet hoodie, cheap leggings, rain-soaked shoes. She looked homeless because now she actually was homeless. People like me don't belong in places like that. Damien stared at her for a second before replying softly. "People like you, Naomi," immediately regretted saying it. But Damien didn't laugh. Instead, he opened the door and stepped out first. "Come eat." Naomi, inside the restaurant. Several people immediately recognized Damien. Naomi noticed the subtle reactions instantly. Staff straightened nervously. A hostess nearly dropped the menus. A man near the bar whispered something while staring. Who exactly was this man? They were quickly escorted to a private table near the back. Naomi sat carefully, trying not to touch anything. Everything looked elegant. Clean white candles, crystal glasses, soft piano music. Meanwhile, Naomi kept thinking about the $23 in her pocket. A waiter approached politely, but Naomi barely looked at the menu because she already knew she couldn't afford anything listed there. Damien noticed. "Order whatever you want." "I'm not hungry," she lied again. "You're a terrible liar." Naomi looked down awkwardly while Damien ordered several dishes without even opening the menu. As the waiter walked away, Naomi finally gathered enough courage to ask, "What do you do?" Damien leaned back slightly in his chair. "I own a few companies, something like that." Naomi almost smiled despite herself. There was something unexpectedly calm about him. Not arrogant, like most rich people she had met serving tables at the diner. He spoke quietly, almost carefully, like someone permanently exhausted by noise. When the food finally arrived, Naomi tried to eat slowly and politely at first. That lasted maybe 30 seconds. After spending the entire day hungry, her body took over. She ate quickly before catching herself in embarrassment. "Sorry," she mumbled. Damien shook his head once. "Don't apologize for being hungry." The sentence hit her strangely hard. Nobody had ever said something like that to her before. Most people made Naomi feel ashamed for existing too loudly in the world, too hungry, too emotional, too large, too needy. But Damien simply sat there letting her eat without judgment. For the first time that night, Naomi felt herself relax slightly. Then suddenly her sketchbook slipped from her lap onto the floor. Several loose pages slid across the carpet. Naomi panicked immediately. Oh, no! She quickly bent down to grab them, but Damien reached one first. His eyes paused on the drawing in his hand. It was a detailed fashion sketch of a dark-skinned, plus-size woman, wearing a long, elegant emerald gown with gold embroidery across the shoulders. Damien looked genuinely surprised. "You drew this?" Naomi froze. Her cheeks burned instantly. "It's stupid. It's not stupid." She looked down nervously. "It's just something I do sometimes." Damien continued flipping slowly through the damp pages. Each sketch was beautiful, sophisticated, original, full of emotion, not just dresses but confidence, strength, grace, women who looked powerful, women who looked seen. "These are incredible," Damien said honestly. Naomi shook her head quickly. "No, they're not. You don't believe that. I know how people look at me." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Silence followed for a second. Then Damien carefully closed the sketchbook and handed it back to her. "People are usually blind," he said quietly. Naomi looked at him for the first time fully. There was something heavy behind his eyes when he said that. Something personal. For the rest of dinner, conversation became easier. Naomi slowly explained pieces of her life. Not everything, just enough. Her parents dying, the foster homes, working since high school, dreaming about fashion school she could never afford. Damien listened without interrupting, and somehow that mattered more than she expected. Most people only listen long enough to judge. Damien listened like every word actually meant something. Eventually, Naomi asked softly, "Why did you stop for me tonight?" Damien looked out the rain-covered window briefly before answering. "Because once upon a time, someone stopped for me too." Naomi frowned slightly. "You were homeless." A faint smile crossed Damien's face again. "Not exactly, but I know what it feels like when the world decides you're disposable." The answer stayed with Naomi. Around midnight, Damien's driver pulled up outside one of the most beautiful hotels Naomi had ever seen. She immediately shook her head. "No, absolutely not. You need somewhere safe tonight. This place probably costs more than my rent used to." Damien ignored the comment and handed the receptionist his card. Within minutes, a room key was placed in Naomi's hand. She stared at it in disbelief. "I can't repay this. I didn't ask you to." Naomi followed him toward the elevator slowly, still unsure whether any of this was real. Before the doors closed, Damien finally looked directly at her again. "You should get some sleep." Naomi nodded softly. Then, just before the elevator doors shut completely, Damien added one final sentence, "And Naomi." She looked up. "Don't let people convince you your life has no value." The elevator doors closed. Naomi stood there frozen for several seconds. Nobody had ever spoken to her like that before. Not once in her entire life. The hotel room was larger than the entire house Evelyn forced her out of. Naomi stood near the doorway in shock after entering, afraid to touch anything. Soft, king-sized bed, warm lighting, huge windows overlooking the city, clean towels folded perfectly in the bathroom. For the first time in years, Naomi felt physically safe, and somehow that feeling almost made her cry harder than the humiliation earlier that night. After showering, she sat carefully on the edge of the bed, holding her sketchbook again. Her phone buzzed suddenly. 3 unread messages from Jasmine. Hope you found a bridge to sleep under. Maybe try dating for money. Nobody's rescuing you. Naomi. Naomi stared at the messages silently before turning her phone off completely. Then she slowly laid down against the soft mattress. Within minutes, exhaustion pulled her into the deepest sleep she'd had in years. The next morning, sunlight spilled gently across the room. For several seconds, Naomi forgot where she was. Then reality returned instantly. The fight, the rain, Damien, the hotel. Naomi sat up quickly and checked the clock. Almost 10 in the morning. Panic rushed through her body. She had overslept. She quickly gathered her belongings and headed downstairs, already preparing herself to explain she couldn't possibly pay for any of this. But when she reached the front desk, the receptionist smiled politely. Mr. Cole already handled everything. Miss Carter. Naomi blinked in confusion. What, he paid for the suite through the end of the week? Naomi stared speechless. The receptionist handed her a small white envelope. Inside was a business card. Damien Cole, CEO of Cole Enterprises. Naomi's eyes widened instantly. Even she knew that name. One of the youngest billionaires in America. Under the card was a handwritten note. Simple, short, but enough to completely change the direction of her life. Don't disappear. Naomi, people like you are rare. Naomi stood across the street, staring up at the massive glass building with her heart pounding uncontrollably. The silver letters at the front entrance read, Cole Enterprises, and even from outside, the place looked intimidating. Men in tailored suits walked quickly through the revolving doors, while expensive cars lined the curb beside the building. She looked down at herself, nervously. The hotel staff had cleaned and dried her clothes overnight, but her outfit was still simple compared to everyone around her. Black jeans, plain brown sweater, old sneakers she tried desperately to clean in the bathroom sink that morning. In her hand was Damien's business card. Part of her still believed this entire thing had been a misunderstanding. Rich men didn't help women like her. Billionaires definitely didn't invite homeless, plus-size girls into their companies. Naomi took a deep breath and walked inside. The lobby alone was bigger than her old high school gymnasium. Marble floors reflected the giant chandelier hanging above the reception area, while employees moved around confidently carrying tablets and coffee cups. Naomi immediately felt out of place. A woman at the front desk smiled politely. "Can I help you?" Naomi swallowed hard and held out the card carefully. Mr. Cole asked me to come." The receptionist's expression changed instantly after reading the card. "One moment, please." Naomi noticed the woman discreetly glance at her appearance before picking up the phone. "Yes, she's here," the receptionist said quietly. A few seconds later, her eyes widened slightly. Then she smiled again, this time far more respectfully. "He'll be down shortly." Naomi blinked in confusion. Before she could process it, movement near the private elevators suddenly caught everyone's attention. Damien stepped out wearing a charcoal suit that fit him perfectly, his dark coat draped over one arm. Conversations around the lobby subtly quieted as employees noticed him approaching. But what shocked Naomi most was that he walked directly toward her without hesitation. "Good," Damien said calmly. "You came." Naomi nodded awkwardly. "I almost didn't. I figured." He glanced briefly at her nervous hands gripping the sketchbook. "Did you sleep at all?" "A little." That's already an improvement. Several employees nearby stared openly now. Naomi could practically feel their confusion. Why was Damien Cole personally greeting this woman? Damien ignored the attention completely. "Come with me." Naomi followed him toward the elevator while whispers quietly spread behind them. Inside the elevator. Silence settled between them for a moment. Naomi finally gathered enough courage to ask, "Why are you doing this?" Damien pressed the button for the top floor before answering. "Because talent matters. That's not a real answer." For the first time since entering the building, Damien looked amused. "You always this direct only when I'm confused." The elevator doors opened into a sleek executive floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Naomi slowed slightly as she walked behind him. Everything felt expensive, elegant, perfect. And then there was her. Damien led her into a large office with dark wood shelves and modern artwork hanging on the walls. Naomi immediately noticed something unexpected sitting near the windows. Fashion sketches, dozens of them. Professional designs pinned across an entire board. "You work in fashion?" she asked in surprise. "One of my companies does." Naomi stared at him. "You own a fashion company, too." Damien loosened his cuffs slightly. "Among other things." Naomi shook her head softly, almost laughing from disbelief. "Of course you do." Damien sat down behind his desk while Naomi remained standing awkwardly. "You can sit." "Naomi, I'm not interrogating you." She slowly lowered herself into the chair across from him. Damien opened a folder on the desk. "I had someone look into your background this morning." Naomi's body tensed instantly. "I'm sorry." "What?" "Relax," he said calmly. "Basic information only." That's still kind of terrifying. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth again. "You worked consistently since you were 16. No criminal record, no college degree. Multiple design competition submissions under anonymous names." Naomi froze. "How did you know that?" "Because you're talented enough to be noticed." Naomi looked down immediately, uncomfortable with compliments. Damien noticed. "You really don't know how good you are." "Do you?" Before Naomi could answer, a knock interrupted the room. A blonde woman in heels entered carrying a tablet. "Mr. Cole, the board meeting starts in 20. She stopped mid-sentence after noticing Naomi. The woman's eyes flicked subtly over Naomi's body, clothes, hair, then back to Damien. Her smile tightened slightly. "I didn't realize you had company." Damien's tone stayed calm. "This is Naomi Carter." The woman nodded politely. "Sophie Lang, Executive Director." Naomi offered a small, nervous smile. Sophie returned it, but Naomi immediately recognized the look underneath. Judgment. She knew that look too well. "After Sophie left?" Naomi quietly asked. "Maybe I shouldn't be here." Damien leaned back in his chair. "Because one woman looked at you strangely. She wasn't strange. She was confused. She'll survive." Naomi let out a small laugh before catching herself. Damien noticed the change immediately. That was the first real laugh he had heard from her. And somehow, hearing it softened something inside him he hadn't felt in years. He stood up and walked toward the design boards near the window. "My company is launching a new campaign next season," he explained. "The creative department is a disaster right now." Naomi carefully walked closer. "These are beautiful," she whispered while looking at the sketches. "They're repetitive." She glanced at him. "You really think that I think fashion keeps pretending only one kind of woman deserves elegance?" Naomi stared at him silently. That sentence hit her deeply because it was exactly how she had always felt. Damien turned toward her. "I want fresh ideas, real ideas." Naomi shook her head nervously. "I've never worked for a company before. You've worked your entire life. That's different." "Not really." Naomi hesitated. "What exactly are you offering me?" "A temporary position in the creative department." Her eyes widened instantly. "What, you heard me? You can't be serious." "I usually am." Naomi laughed nervously. "I don't even have qualifications. You have skill. That's not enough for places like this." Damien walked closer slowly. "It should be." The room became strangely quiet for a second. Naomi quickly looked away first. Her heartbeat suddenly felt unsteady. Why did this man make simple conversations feel intense? Damien cleared his throat slightly and stepped back. "You'll start with assistant-level work. Sketch revisions, concept support, small projects." Naomi still looked stunned. "And if I fail, then you fail. That's comforting. But at least you failed trying to become something more than what other people decided you were." Naomi fell silent after that. Nobody had ever spoken to her future like it mattered before. Most people only talked about her limitations. Damien talked like possibilities actually existed. A soft knock interrupted them again before a young assistant entered carrying coffee. As she placed the drinks down, her eyes moved toward Naomi curiously. "Should I prepare visitor clearance?" Damien answered without hesitation. "Employee clearance." The assistant blinked in surprise. Naomi nearly did too. After the girl left, Naomi looked at Damien carefully. "You just hired me that fast. You walked into the building despite being terrified. That already tells me enough." Naomi looked down at her sketchbook quietly. For the first time in years, something dangerous started growing inside her chest. Hope. Later that afternoon, Damien personally showed her around the creative department. The moment they entered together, conversations visibly slowed. Designers looked up from computers. Assistants exchanged subtle glances. Naomi could practically hear everyone wondering the same thing. Why her one man wearing designer glasses gave Naomi a quick, fake smile before whispering something to the woman beside him. Both of them looked toward Naomi's body briefly. Her confidence immediately started shrinking again. Damien noticed instantly, without saying a word. He stopped walking and turned toward the entire room. "This is Naomi Carter," he said calmly. "She'll be working with the creative team moving forward." Nobody spoke. Damien's expression hardened slightly. "And if anyone here has a problem with that," he continued quietly, "you can discuss it directly with me." Complete silence. Naomi stared at him in shock. Nobody had ever defended her publicly before. Not once. As Damien continued walking, Naomi followed beside him silently. A few seconds later, she spoke softly. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," Damien replied calmly. "I did." Naomi's first week at Cole Enterprises felt unreal. Every morning, she woke up expecting the entire thing to disappear like a dream. She kept waiting for someone to stop her at the entrance and say there had been a mistake. But every day, security greeted her politely. Every day. Her employee badge opened the elevators. And every day, Damien somehow noticed when she arrived without ever asking where she had been. At first, most of the creative team barely spoke to her unless necessary. Naomi could feel their curiosity every time she walked through the department. Some people stared because of her size. Others stared because Damien Cole himself had hired her personally. That alone made her the center of gossip. One afternoon, Naomi walked into the break room and immediately heard silence fall. A woman near the coffee machine quickly looked away. Another man pretended to focus on his laptop. Naomi already knew what had happened. They had been talking about her. She quietly grabbed water from the refrigerator and tried to leave, but then she heard someone whisper behind her, "I still don't understand why he hired her." Another voice answered softly, "Come on, you know exactly why." Naomi froze briefly. The first woman laughed quietly. "Please, Damien Cole dates models. That girl isn't even close to his type." Naomi walked out before they could notice the pain on her face. The words shouldn't have hurt, but they did, because part of her agreed with them. Back in the design room, Naomi forced herself to focus on work. Large fabric samples covered the tables while sketches and mood boards filled the walls around her. She carefully adjusted one of the campaign illustrations, trying to ignore the heaviness in her chest. A shadow suddenly appeared beside her desk. "You skipped lunch." Naomi looked up. Damien stood there holding 2 coffee cups. "I wasn't hungry." She lied automatically. "You say that a lot." He placed 1 cup beside her anyway before noticing her expression. "What happened?" "Nothing." Damien stayed quiet for a moment. Then he calmly pulled a chair beside her desk and sat down. The entire department immediately pretended not to watch. "You know," he said softly, "people who say cruel things usually do it because they need someone else to feel smaller." Naomi looked at him carefully. "Did Sophie tell you?" "No." "Then how did you know something happened?" Damien leaned back slightly. "Because every time you're upset, you stop looking people in the eyes." Naomi looked away immediately after hearing that. It scared her how quickly he noticed things about her. Damien studied her silently for a second before speaking again. "You don't owe anyone beauty standards to deserve respect." Naomi gave a small, sad smile. "Easy for you to say." "Why?" She almost laughed. "Look at you." Damien frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "You're rich, attractive, powerful. People probably listened every time you entered a room your whole life." For the first time since knowing him, Damien's expression darkened slightly. "You think money protects people from loneliness?" Naomi stayed quiet. Damien looked down at the coffee in his hand. "My father used to tell me I was worthless unless I succeeded," he said calmly. "The moment I became useful, people suddenly respected me." Naomi watched him carefully. "That's different." "Not really." Their eyes met briefly. Something shifted again between them. Not attraction exactly. Not yet. Something quieter. Recognition. 2 people who understood pain differently but deeply. Damien stood slowly. "Come with me." Naomi blinked. "Where you'll see." 30 minutes later, Naomi sat beside him in the back seat of his car while the city moved outside the windows. She glanced at him curiously. "You always kidnap employees during work hours." Damien looked amused. "Only the difficult ones." "I'm difficult. You argue with me constantly. That's because you keep doing weird billionaire things." A quiet laugh escaped him. Naomi stared slightly in shock. "You actually laugh?" Damien raised an eyebrow. "I'm not a robot." "Naomi, you kind of act like one sometimes." The driver suddenly tried to hide a smile in the front seat. Damien shook his head slowly. "I regret hiring you already." But Naomi noticed something important. He looked lighter around her, less cold. The car eventually stopped in front of a small community center near the south side of the city. Children ran across the basketball court outside while volunteers carried food boxes into the building. Naomi looked confused. "Why are we here?" Damien adjusted his coat calmly. "I fund this place." "You do? I grew up not far from here." Naomi stared at him in surprise again. Nothing about Damien looked connected to places like this anymore. Inside the center, several staff members greeted Damien warmly. Not formally like employees, genuinely. An older woman named Mrs. Lewis hugged him tightly the moment he entered. "You disappeared again," she scolded. "I've been busy. You're always busy." Then Mrs. Lewis noticed Naomi standing beside him. Her eyes softened immediately. "Well, now." She smiled warmly. "Who's this beautiful young woman?" Naomi almost looked behind herself. Nobody described her that way. "I'm Naomi," she said quietly. Mrs. Lewis took her hand instantly. "You have kind eyes." "Naomi. I trust people with kind eyes." Naomi felt something tighten unexpectedly in her chest. The warmth in this place felt unfamiliar. Children laughed loudly nearby while volunteers prepared meals in the kitchen. Nobody stared at Naomi strangely. Nobody judged her body. Nobody whispered. A little girl suddenly ran toward Naomi holding markers. "Can you draw princesses?" she asked excitedly. Naomi blinked before smiling softly. A little. Within minutes. She sat at a table surrounded by children while sketching dresses and cartoon characters on paper. The kids loved her instantly. Damien stood near the doorway quietly watching her. He noticed how naturally she smiled around them, how gentle she became, how different she looked when she forgot to be afraid. "Mrs. Lewis walked beside him slowly. "She's important to you already." Damien kept his eyes on Naomi. "I barely know her." "That's not what I said." Damien didn't answer. Across the room, Naomi laughed as one little girl showed her a terrible drawing of a dog with 6 legs. "That's not a dog." Naomi teased gently. "Yes, it is. That dog pays taxes." The children burst into laughter, and before Damien realized it, he was smiling again too. Later that evening, Naomi stood outside the center while cool wind moved softly through the street. "I didn't know billionaires volunteered," she admitted quietly. Damien slipped his hands into his coat pockets. "Most don't." Naomi looked at him carefully. "You're not what I expected. Neither are you." Her heartbeat stumbled slightly after hearing that. For a second, neither of them spoke. The city lights reflected softly across the street between them, while tension slowly built in the silence. Then Naomi looked down nervously. "I should probably go before I lose this job somehow." "You're not losing your job." "You sound very confident." "I am." Naomi smiled faintly. Damien opened the car door for her, but before she entered, she turned toward him again. "Why do you trust me so much?" Damien looked at her for several quiet seconds before answering honestly. "Because you're the first person I've met in years who wants nothing from me." Naomi stared at him silently, and for the first time since they met, she realized Damien Cole might be far lonelier than she was. Over the next few weeks, Naomi slowly became part of Damien's world, though she still felt like someone standing outside a beautiful house looking through the windows. Every day at Cole Enterprises brought something new she had never experienced before. Meetings with designers, fabric presentations, creative discussions about campaigns and luxury collections. Sometimes she caught herself forgetting who she used to be, until someone's judgmental stare reminded her again. But little by little, things started changing. Not dramatically, not magically, just quietly. Naomi stopped hiding behind oversized hoodies and dark colors every day. She started wearing fitted blouses that actually matched her shape instead of trying to disappear under fabric. She began styling her curls instead of tying them back constantly. Some mornings, she even wore lipstick, though she usually wiped it off before entering the office because she worried people would think she was trying too hard. Still, Damien noticed every change. One evening, Naomi stayed late adjusting campaign sketches while most employees had already gone home. Music played softly through her headphones as she worked, completely focused. She didn't notice Damien standing near the doorway at first. "You missed dinner again." Naomi jumped slightly and pulled off one headphone. "Why do you appear out of nowhere like a serial killer?" Damien looked down at the takeout bag in his hand. "Interesting reaction to someone bringing you food." Naomi laughed softly. That sound was becoming more natural around him now. Damien placed the food on her desk before his eyes moved toward the sketch she was finishing. It was a formal gown design for plus-size women. Elegant, powerful. Nothing like the narrow, unrealistic dresses most luxury brands created. Damien studied it quietly. "You designed this?" Naomi nodded nervously. "It's probably too different for the campaign." "No," he said calmly. "It's honest." She looked at him carefully. Damien walked closer to the desk. "Most designers create clothes for people they want to impress. You create clothes for people you understand." Naomi lowered her eyes shyly. "That sounds nice when you say it. It's true." Their closeness suddenly felt dangerous. Damien stood near enough for Naomi to smell his cologne faintly again. Warm, clean, masculine. The kind of scent that lingered in your thoughts after someone walked away. Naomi quickly focused on opening the food container to calm herself down. "You know," she muttered softly, "normal bosses don't personally feed employees. Normal employees don't work until midnight. I'm trying to prove I deserve this opportunity." Damien's expression shifted slightly after hearing that. "You already deserve it." Naomi looked at him. "No offense, Damien. But you don't know what it feels like to constantly prove you belong somewhere." The room became quiet. Then Damien answered softly, "Actually, I do." Naomi immediately regretted the comment. "I didn't mean my father grew up wealthy." Damien interrupted calmly. "I didn't." She frowned slightly. Damien leaned against the desk beside her. "My mother raised me alone most of my childhood. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment not far from the South Side Center." Naomi listened carefully. "She worked herself sick, trying to keep food on the table. My father only acknowledged me after I became successful enough to matter. There was no self-pity in his voice. That somehow made it sadder." Naomi spoke quietly. "What happened to your mom?" Damien looked toward the dark windows. "Cancer." Her chest tightened immediately. "She died before I turned 26. Naomi's voice softened. "I'm sorry." Damien nodded once but said nothing else. For a few moments, silence settled gently between them. Not awkward silence. The kind that only exists between people slowly learning how to trust each other. Then Naomi smiled faintly. "Okay. Now I feel bad for calling you a serial killer." That finally made Damien laugh again, a real laugh this time. Low and warm. And Naomi realized something terrifying. She liked hearing it. A few days later, Cole Enterprises hosted an important luxury brand event inside one of their downtown buildings. Influencers, investors, celebrities, and media filled the enormous ballroom while cameras flashed constantly near the entrance. Naomi nearly had a panic attack the moment she arrived. I absolutely do not belong here, she whispered. She stood beside Damien near the entrance, wearing a dark emerald dress she had designed and altered herself. It wasn't flashy, just elegant enough to make her feel slightly confident. Unfortunately, confidence disappeared quickly around women who looked like magazine covers. Damien adjusted his cufflinks calmly beside her. You said that already. Because it's true. No, he replied quietly. You're just uncomfortable. There's a difference. Damien looked directly at her. Naomi, her heartbeat skipped immediately. You look beautiful tonight. The words hit her so hard she forgot how to breathe for a second. Nobody had ever said that to her in a way that felt sincere before. Not pity, not surprise, not pretty for a big girl, just beautiful. Naomi looked away quickly before he could notice how emotional that made her. Inside the ballroom, attention followed Damien immediately. Wealthy investors shook his hand. Socialites smiled too brightly around him. Several women clearly tried getting his attention. Naomi stayed close behind, feeling increasingly invisible again. Then suddenly, a tall, glamorous woman approached Damien with a dazzling smile. Damien, she purred before kissing his cheek. You disappeared on me. Naomi instantly recognized her from television. Vanessa Monroe, supermodel, of course. Vanessa's eyes slowly moved toward Naomi. Her smile faded slightly. And who's this? Before Naomi could even introduce herself. Damien answered calmly. Naomi Carter. Vanessa raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow. I see. Naomi immediately recognized the judgment hidden inside those two words. Vanessa turned back toward Damien. Your type changed dramatically. The comment landed exactly how intended. Naomi's stomach tightened instantly, but Damien's expression hardened. Careful. Vanessa. The model looked surprised by his tone. Damien calmly stepped closer to Naomi instead. She's here with me. The room suddenly felt quieter. Vanessa forced another smile. Well, enjoy your evening. The moment she walked away. Naomi grabbed a champagne glass from a passing waiter and drank half of it too quickly. Damien glanced sideways at her. You hate champagne. How do you know you make the same face every time you drink it? Naomi blinked. You notice too much. Yes. His answer came so quickly it caught her off guard. Across the ballroom, several photographers suddenly noticed Damien standing beside Naomi. Cameras immediately lifted. Flashes exploded. Damien, over here. Who is she? Are you dating? Naomi froze completely. Panic rushed through her chest. She instinctively stepped backward, but Damien gently touched her lower back. It's okay, he said quietly. No man had ever touched her like that before. Softly, protectively, like he was proud to stand beside her instead of embarrassed by her. But the cameras kept flashing, and Naomi already knew what would happen next. People online would tear her apart. She had seen the internet destroy women who looked like her before. The moment the event finally ended hours later, Naomi sat silently in Damien's car staring out the window, while anxiety slowly consumed her. You're thinking too much, Damien said softly. They're going to post pictures. Yes, they're going to make fun of me. Damien stayed quiet, because they both knew she was right. Naomi laughed bitterly under her breath. You know what's funny? A week ago, my biggest problem was finding somewhere to sleep. Damien looked at her carefully. And now I'm sitting beside a billionaire wondering how badly strangers are about to humiliate me online. Damien's jaw tightened slightly. You shouldn't have to prepare yourself for cruelty just because people can't imagine someone like you beside someone like me. Naomi looked toward him slowly. Someone like you. Someone like me. Even Damien understood how the world saw them. The car stopped outside Naomi's apartment building shortly after midnight. Damien had quietly arranged a temporary luxury apartment for her after learning she had nowhere safe to stay. As Naomi stepped out of the car, Damien called her name softly. She leaned slightly back toward the open door. What? For a second. Damien looked like he wanted to say something important, something personal. Instead, he simply asked, "Are you okay?" Naomi held his gaze quietly before giving a small nod. "Yeah," she whispered. "I think I am." But the moment she entered the apartment and checked her phone, her stomach dropped. Pictures from the gala were already everywhere online. Most headlines focused on Damien, but the comments focused on her. Why is he with her? She trapped him for money. He could literally date anyone. She's too fat for him. Naomi stared at the screen while humiliation slowly spread through her chest again. Then suddenly she noticed something else. One new private message. No profile picture. No name. Just one sentence. "He's hiding the real reason he chose you." Naomi stared at the anonymous message for nearly a full minute without moving. "He's hiding the real reason he chose you." Her fingers tightened around the phone slowly. At first, she tried convincing herself it was meaningless. Rich people attracted drama constantly. Damien was famous, powerful, attractive, and surrounded by people who wanted attention. Maybe someone simply enjoyed creating problems, but once doubt enters the mind, it spreads quietly, and Naomi had spent her entire life waiting for good things to disappear. The next morning, the internet was even worse. Pictures from the gala flooded social media. Some people defended Naomi, praising her elegance and confidence, but the cruel comments overwhelmed everything else. "She looks like his assistant. No billionaire would actually love someone shaped like that. This has to be a publicity stunt." Naomi sat on the edge of her bed reading comment after comment until her chest physically hurt. Then her phone rang. "Damien." She stared at the screen before answering quietly. "Hello, you didn't come to work." Naomi looked at the clock. Almost noon. "I wasn't feeling well." Silence. Then Damien spoke softly. "You've been reading comments." It wasn't a question. Naomi rubbed her forehead tiredly. "People are horrible, yes." "You sound very calm about that. Because strangers don't get to decide your value." Naomi almost laughed bitterly. Easy thing to say when millions of people don't spend all day insulting your body. The line became quiet for a moment. Then Damien answered honestly, "You think criticism doesn't reach me too? That's different." "No," he said softly. "It isn't." Naomi closed her eyes. She was exhausted, emotionally exhausted. "I just need today alone." Damien hesitated briefly before answering. "All right." But before hanging up, he added quietly, "Don't disappear on me again." Again. The words stayed with her after the call ended. That evening, Naomi forced herself to leave the apartment for groceries. She wore an oversized hoodie and kept her head down while walking through the city, hoping nobody would recognize her from the photos online. Unfortunately, some people already had. 2 teenage girls whispered loudly near the frozen food aisle while staring at her. That's her, the billionaire girl. No way he actually likes her. Naomi abandoned the shopping basket and walked out immediately. By the time she reached the sidewalk outside, tears blurred her vision. Naomi. She turned quickly. Sophie stood near the curb holding car keys. Unlike before, Sophie's expression looked almost sympathetic now. "You okay?" Naomi wiped her face quickly. "I'm fine. You're crying in front of a grocery store." Naomi looked away silently. After a moment, Sophie sighed softly. "Come have coffee with me." Naomi almost refused, but something inside her felt too tired to keep pretending she was strong. 20 minutes later, they sat inside a quiet cafe near downtown. Naomi wrapped both hands around a cup of coffee while Sophie studied her carefully across the table. "You really don't know, do you?" Sophie asked. Naomi frowned slightly. "Know what that Damien hasn't cared about another human being in years?" Naomi looked confused. Sophie leaned back in her chair. "I've worked with him almost 8 years. He keeps people at a distance, employees, friends, women, everybody." Naomi stared down at the coffee quietly. "He's kind to me because he feels sorry for me." Sophie immediately shook her head. "No, Damien hates pity." Naomi looked up slowly. "Then why me?" Sophie smiled faintly. "That's the same question everyone keeps asking." The answer should have comforted Naomi. Instead, it scared her more, because deep down, she still couldn't understand why someone like Damien looked at her the way he did. Later that night, Naomi returned home emotionally drained. The moment she entered the apartment, she noticed another envelope pushed beneath the door. Her stomach tightened immediately. Inside was a printed photograph. Damien standing beside a tall, glamorous woman outside a hotel years earlier. Underneath the photo were typed words, "He always chooses women he can control." Naomi stared at the picture silently. Then another paper slipped from the envelope. A list of names, models, influencers, actresses, women Damien had reportedly dated over the years. Every single one looked perfect. Tall, thin, flawless. Nothing like Naomi. Her chest tightened painfully again. Suddenly, all her insecurities returned at once. Maybe Vanessa was right. Maybe everybody was right. Maybe she was just temporary. A charity project. A lonely billionaire helping a broken girl because it made him feel good about himself. The next day at work, Naomi could barely focus. She kept replaying the anonymous messages inside her head while sketching meaningless lines across paper. Then, Damien walked into the design room. The moment he saw her face, his expression changed. What happened? Nothing. "Naomi, I'm working." Damien walked closer slowly. "Look at me." She didn't, because if she looked directly at him right now, she might cry, and Naomi hated crying in front of people. Damien lowered his voice. "Talk to me." Finally, she looked up. "Why me?" His eyebrows pulled together slightly. What Naomi stood abruptly from her chair. "You dated women who looked like they belonged on magazine covers. Models, celebrities, women everybody admired." Her voice shook slightly now. Then suddenly, "You pick me up off the street." The room became completely silent. Several nearby employees awkwardly pretended not to listen. Damien's expression hardened slightly. "Who's been talking to you?" "That's not the point." "Yes, it is." Naomi laughed bitterly. "No, the point is, I don't understand why you keep looking at me like I'm special." Damien stared at her quietly for several seconds. Then he said something that completely caught her off guard. "Because you are." Naomi shook her head immediately. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." "No, you know the version of me you saved." The sentence hit harder than she intended. Damien's jaw tightened. "You think I helped you because you were weak. I think maybe you liked being the hero. For the first time since meeting him, Damien actually looked hurt, real hurt. He stepped closer carefully. "You want to know the truth?" he asked quietly. Naomi crossed her arms tightly, trying to protect herself emotionally. Damien looked directly into her eyes. "I noticed you because you walked through humiliation without becoming cruel." Naomi's breathing slowed slightly. "You were sitting alone in the rain after being thrown away by people who should have loved you. And even then, when I first spoke to you, you still answered politely. Neither of them moved. You know what most people become after enough pain," Damien continued softly. "Bitter, angry, manipulative. But somehow you stayed kind." Naomi felt tears building again. Damien stepped even closer now. "You think I care about your size?" he asked quietly. "I care that you make people feel seen. I care that children trust you immediately. I care that you walk into rooms expecting rejection and still somehow keep your heart soft." Naomi's eyes burned. Nobody had ever described her that way before. Not once. For a second, it felt like Damien saw parts of her nobody else ever noticed. The tension between them became almost unbearable. Naomi's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Then why does it feel like everyone's waiting for you to realize I'm not enough?" Damien looked at her for several long seconds. Then finally, softly, honestly, he answered, "Because the world trained you to believe love is something you have to earn by becoming smaller." Naomi stood completely still after hearing those words. "Because the world trained you to believe love is something you have to earn by becoming smaller." Nobody had ever understood her that clearly before. Not her foster family, not classmates, not strangers online, not even Naomi herself. For a moment, the entire room around them disappeared. The whispers, the office noise, the pressure building outside their relationship, none of it mattered. All Naomi could focus on was the way Damien looked at her. Not with pity, not with embarrassment, not like a problem he needed to fix. He looked at her like she mattered, and that terrified her. Naomi lowered her eyes first, emotionally overwhelmed. "You make everything sound beautiful when you say it," Damien answered quietly. "That's because you only know how to describe yourself through pain." Before Naomi could respond, Sophie suddenly hurried into the design department holding a tablet. Her expression looked serious. "Damien, you need to see this." Damien turned immediately. Sophie handed him the tablet silently. The moment his eyes scanned the screen, his face darkened. Naomi's stomach tightened instantly. What happened? Neither of them answered right away. Then Sophie finally spoke carefully. "Someone leaked a story to the media this morning." Naomi walked closer slowly. On the screen was a headline already spreading online. "Billionaire CEO accused of using homeless woman for company publicity." Below it were photos of Naomi entering coal enterprises beside Damien, along with anonymous sources claiming their relationship was staged to improve the company's public image after recent criticism about lack of diversity. Naomi's chest dropped. Comments flooded beneath the article. "She was never special. Told you this was fake." He turned her into a charity project. Naomi felt physically sick. Damien looked furious. "This is Marcus," he said coldly. Naomi frowned weakly. "Who, my competitor?" Sophie crossed her arms tightly. "He's been trying to damage the company for months." Naomi stared at the article again. Her hands began shaking. Because deep down, part of her had already feared this exact thing. Damien immediately noticed Naomi, but she stepped back slightly. You said people like me are rare, she whispered. You are. Then why does everybody think I'm just some poor girl you rescued to make yourself look good? Because people are miserable. Naomi laughed bitterly through tears. Or because it's believable. Damien's expression hardened instantly. Don't do that. Do what reduce yourself to the way cruel people see you. Naomi shook her head emotionally. You don't understand how exhausting this is. I do understand. No, she replied softly. You really don't. The room fell silent again. Then Naomi looked directly at him. When people attack you, they criticize your business decisions. Her voice cracked slightly. When they attack me, they attack my body, my face, my worth as a woman. Damien said nothing, because she was right. Naomi wiped her tears quickly, embarrassed to cry in front of everyone. I can't breathe under this anymore. Then before Damien could stop her, she grabbed her bag and walked out of the department. Naomi. But she kept walking. The elevator doors closed before he reached her. That night, Naomi sat alone inside her apartment while city lights glowed softly beyond the windows. Her phone buzzed non-stop with notifications she no longer wanted to read. Every article, every comment, every cruel joke. Eventually, she turned the phone face down and covered her eyes. She was tired, not physically, soul tired. For a few beautiful weeks, Damien made her believe she could exist in the world without apologizing for herself. He made her forget what rejection felt like, and now reality was dragging her back down again. A knock suddenly interrupted the silence. Naomi immediately knew it was him. She didn't move. Another knock followed. Naomi! Her chest tightened hearing his voice through the door. Please, open it. She stayed frozen. After a long silence, Damien spoke again, softer this time. I'm not leaving. Naomi closed her eyes painfully. Then finally, slowly, she walked to the door and opened it halfway. Damien stood there still wearing the same dark suit from work, though now he looked exhausted, worried, human. The moment their eyes met, Naomi looked away first. You shouldn't be here. I wasn't going to let you sit alone after today. Naomi crossed her arms tightly. I'm fine. No, you're hurt. The honesty in his voice nearly broke her again. Damien stepped inside quietly after she moved aside. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Naomi whispered, Maybe they're right. Damien looked at her immediately. No, you don't even know what I'm going to say. I know you're wrong. Naomi laughed softly through tears. You know what the saddest part is? A month ago, nobody noticed me enough to insult me. Damien's jaw tightened. And now millions of people are discussing whether someone who looks like me deserves to stand next to someone who looks like you. Damien walked closer carefully. You think I care about any of that? You should... I don't. Naomi looked up emotionally. You say that because you've never had to question whether you were lovable. The moment the sentence left her mouth, Damien's expression changed. Something vulnerable appeared there briefly. Then he answered quietly, I question it every day. Naomi froze. Damien looked down for a second before speaking again. My father loved success more than people. Most women I've dated loved access more than me. He gave a tired laugh without humor. After enough time, you stop believing anyone sees you beyond your money. Naomi listened silently. Damien stepped closer. Then I met you. Her heartbeat quickened immediately. You looked at me like I was just a man standing beside you in the rain. He said softly, Not a billionaire. Not an opportunity. Just a person. Naomi's eyes filled again. Damien's voice lowered even more. And honestly, Naomi, I think you saved me long before I ever helped you. The air between them suddenly felt heavy, intimate, dangerous. Naomi whispered shakily, "Damien," but before she could finish, his phone rang sharply. He ignored it. It rang again, then again. Finally, Damien glanced at the screen and cursed quietly under his breath. "What happened?" Naomi asked. Damien's face darkened instantly. Marcus released another story. Naomi's stomach dropped. This time, the article was worse. Far worse. Anonymous sources now claimed Naomi had manipulated Damien emotionally for money and luxury benefits. Old photos of her leaving shelters and low-income neighborhoods were spread online beside mocking captions. Naomi stared at the screen in horror. "They're destroying you because of me," she whispered. "That's not your fault. But it's happening." Damien grabbed his coat immediately. "I'll handle this." But Naomi barely heard him anymore, because deep down, fear had already made its decision for her. The next morning, Damien arrived at her apartment with coffee and breakfast. But the moment the door opened, something felt wrong. Silence. Empty silence. His chest tightened instantly. "Naomi." No answer. He walked further inside. The apartment was clean. Too clean. Then he saw the folded letter resting on the kitchen counter beside her employee badge. Damien slowly picked it up. His jaw tightened harder with every line he read. "You gave me the first peaceful moments I've had in years. You made me feel visible when the world spent my entire life pretending I wasn't. But I can already see what staying beside me is costing you. People like Marcus will never stop using me to hurt you. And eventually, you'll resent me for it too. I don't think I could survive becoming another disappointment in your life. So before that happens, I'm leaving first. Thank you for seeing something beautiful in me when I couldn't see it myself." Damien lowered the letter slowly. Then he noticed the closet. Empty. Naomi was gone.